big part of refereeing is building relationships with people, and we have a very, very unique role where we have a very diverse section of people to build relationships with. I think the key thing to think about is when you start that process of building relationships, and for me, it has to start off the field of play. On the field of play is a high pressure, high intensity environment where, to be honest, building a relationship with a referee is probably not going to be in a player's thoughts at any point. Maybe slightly the captain, which we'll talk about later, but realistically, once you're on the field of play, you can continue that process, but it needs to start. So I think a big thing that maybe not referees don't do enough is engage with people off the field of play. Starting to speak, introducing themselves, because again, if a player is more comfortable with you and has had a conversation with you, they might be more comfortable on the field of play and having those conversations. A great time to sort of build this is when maybe in cup competitions, you get opportunities to be fourth official. Fourth official is one of the most challenging roles in football because it's totally about building relationships. There's very few actions you take as a fourth official, but you're having to manage other people's decisions. You're having to manage other people's expectations. And certainly I know from the tier 2 referees in Northern Ireland, I always stress how important it is those, because they think they're appointed as fourth official. It's an easy day. It's not an easy day. This is where you start building the relationship with the managers that you're going to have to be dealing with in 3 or 4 years to come. And it's a vital place where that starts. Equally off the field of play, I know there's always that awkward conversation about club marks. You know, how important are club marks? Certainly at the grassroots level, they're very important. And often club marks is about perception. So if you take that time to speak to the manager, take that time to speak to the club secretary, all within your pre-match preparation, they're the best times to start those conversations. So actually after the game, rather than somebody ranting and raving, they might actually say, well, do you know what, this person made the attempt to approach me at the start of the game. They seem very reasonable. I'll actually go and have a reasonable conversation with them now. And there's that school of thought of when should conversations happen about what happens on the field of play. For me, these are the most important conversations we have as referees, because we spoke about, having that problem club. See, having a conversation and dealing with it before you leave the ground can be really, really important, because you're not looking for approval, but actually getting your point across and explaining a decision, whether right or wrong. And it could be that really, really awkward conversation. I know a lot of clubs video games now, and I've seen that awkward conversation where they come in and show you a clip and say, well, listen, what do you think? Some of the most powerful conversations I've seen is when a referee's looked at it and gone, okay, this is what I thought I saw, but actually I did get that wrong. And that's a really, really powerful conversation. It's not something you should be hopefully doing very often, but sometimes actually that, from a relationship building point of view, can make your relationship that much stronger with the clubs that you referee in. And there's a big perception that referees should be coming out and apologising for decisions. I've never apologised for a decision in my life. I've never done anything on purpose. Apologising for a decision and debriefing a decision and acknowledging, yes, I may have got that one wrong, are two very, very different things. And that's about building that positive relationship. You shouldn't be, there isn't a respect there if somebody expects you to apologise, but there's a big respect there if somebody's happy to say, actually, I got that wrong. Equally, you could look at it and go, well, actually, I got that right, and these are the reasons why I got that right. But these are really, really important conversations that probably don't get focused on enough, both pre-match and post-match. And it's really good for referees' closure. When you're leaving a ground, you can say, well, do you know what? I've explained everything that I've had to. I've done what I need to do on the field of play, and I can move on. And the next time I come to a club, actually the relationships are going to be more positive. Equally, we've got other people to consider. So observers and mentors and coaches we have to build relationships with. And I think what we have to acknowledge is that the relationships with those people are going to be different. With our mentor, it's going to be very much based on trust. It's so important to find the right mentor. And a mentor may not be a refereeing person. It may be the person that travels with you to games. It may be a colleague. It may be somebody. But there has to be that two-way level of trust that I can be honest with them and they can be honest with me. As I've said, the mentor is not the person that you is constantly saying, you've had a great game. Actually, they may be your biggest critic. But it's really important to know that you've got a small section of people you can go to and get that positive or indeed negative feedback from. And I think with observers as well, we often hear with observers, it's going to be a 2-way or a 3-way, or depending on how many officials there are, a 5-way conversation. The responsibility of that's not just on the observer. Observers have a job to do. They're going to be giving opinions. You absolutely have to accept that you won't agree with all the opinions, but it's about having that bit of empathy to say, I see where the observer's coming from in the vast majority. Sometimes you will just not see the point, and that's fine. And they can be parked and they can be taken away. But I often hear people say, that observer's coming to see me, then, I'm not even going to read that report. For me, there's an issue there around self-analysis that says if you can't find something in an observer's report that you go, that's something I could work on, there's an issue there with me as a referee, because I need to start looking at my self-analysis. So I think it is about building relationships with observers. You will probably see them quite regularly. You will always have that observer that you hate seeing walk through the changing room door, and you'll always have the observer that you love seeing walking through the changing room door. But actually, those two observers are probably the most important observers you'll have, because you've got one observer that likes your style, will reinforce what you're doing, will come up with maybe the smaller things that you can improve in your game, and then you've actually got the other observer. And I know with those observers, I always see it as a real challenge. Actually, those games are probably the games that I go and put the most effort in, because that's the observer that maybe hasn't marked me that well in the past. So I want to prove myself. I want to push myself harder for this guy. I remember I was observed in a game in the Conference North, and I had probably the worst assessment I've ever had. I was a very inexperienced referee. I didn't think I had as bad a game as the observer report said. But 12 months later, I got the same observer at the same ground. And I remember how much effort I put in that game and how valuable it was to see that observer say, I saw you 12 months ago and these are the changes. And I think that's why it's important to keep that track of where you're going as a referee, because I could actually look back 12 months before that at the same report and go, at the time I looked at that report and I didn't see it. 12 months later, with the benefit of hindsight and experience, I do see it. And it is so important to keep that track on your career where you are, not only to identify your future development levels, but also to acknowledge how well you've done. As referees, we don't praise ourselves enough, and occasionally we need to look and see how far we've come. In terms of building relationships, I think it's about finding the right times to do it. There's so many opportunities that we have during our match day experience where we can speak to players. And speaking to players in a neutral area is really, really important. That could be in the dressing rooms before the game. It could be when you arrive in the car park. I think it's all about being seen as being approachable as well. Often people see the referees as the third. You've got the home team, the away team, and the referees. We like to see ourselves as part of the game. Often we're not being seen. Our role is very removed from that of the players. So making ourselves as available and approachable is really, really important. And there are loads of times to do that. It could be the exchange of team sheets, having a conversation, retaining information from the last time you were there. So, if you spoke to somebody before, actually coming in and saying, how's this going now? Or how do you see it? It makes you more human. It makes you more approachable. It makes you more relatable. That person going, you remembered that from before. It's really, really important, those little connections that you make and actually building on them. And some players don't want to communicate with referees, others do, and I think it's using your skill and judgment to find these players. So it might be during the warm-up that a player comes over, it's the player that's practicing the corner kicks in front of when you're warming up, and if that player seems, that's your contact. The role of a captain is a difficult one for referees, because often the captain isn't selected for their ability to communicate with referees. So actually your captain may not be the person that you want to go to. It may not be your go-to person. That may be somebody else on the field of play. But I think it's important to have an ally on each side that you've identified and gone, do you know what? I could use that player to my advantage. I could use that player to have a word with the young lad up front that maybe isn't as experienced as them. It's all about the little connections that you make and building on them, not just during a game, but from game to game. And actually remembering, do you know what? When I went to this club the last time, the number 3 was really good. Actually really helped. And equally, if something goes wrong in a game, you make a bad decision, actually it might be that player that helps you get out of that. It may be that player that's speaking for you. And they're often experienced players. So it's really about building on all the opportunities that you get during a game to communicate, and making sure that that process is an ongoing one. As referees, we're always going to be seen as the outsiders. That's our role in the game. We always want to be seen as neutral in a way, but see the little things that we can do can make your life so much easier, because when you turn up at the ground and it's, that referee's okay, I remember taught you, that's a really, really good starting point to go from. And they're not always going to agree with your decisions, but the connections that you've made from past games and opportunities before the game, even in the clubhouse after the game. I know there's a very mixed opinion on whether referees should go to the clubhouse after the game. For me, some of my most constructive and important conversations have happened in that environment. That is essentially a neutral environment. And to sit with both teams and speak about the game or speak about something different breaks down a lot of the barriers that you're going to have as a referee, because you will face a lot of barriers. You're not there to be universally liked. We never will be. We've spoken about, is social media the place to do it? I often don't think it is, but I do think that one-to-one conversations with managers, with players, are really, really important. And actually, from a debriefing process and a self-analysis process, is where you'll pick up a lot of information as well.